Have you ever been in a hospital waiting room or even just walked past a clinic and felt a strange sense of unease settle over you? It's not just the sterile smell or the sight of people looking worried, it's the sounds. The low, rhythmic beep of a machine down the hall, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, maybe a muffled, distressed cry from behind a closed door. You get this feeling that the anxiety in the room is contagious. You might feel a little more on edge, a little more sensitive. We usually chalk this up to empathy, a purely psychological response to seeing or hearing others in distress. It's just us being human, sharing in a collective feeling. But what if it wasn't just in your head? What if the sound of suffering itself, stripped of all other context, just the raw audio, was enough to create a physical change in your own body? A team of researchers recently looked into this, and what they found suggests that this contagious pain might be far more literal than we ever imagined. They discovered that for mice, the ultrasonic squeaks of another mouse in pain were enough to induce inflammation in the brains of healthy mice, making them physically more sensitive to pain themselves. It raises a fascinating and slightly unsettling question. Is pain, in a way, audible? And can you catch it just by listening? Is pain audible, and can you catch it just by listening? I mean, that's the question, isn't it? It's really intriguing, and yeah, like I said, a little unsettling. It really anchors our deep dive today.
It really does. It forces you to sort of rethink pain.
Totally. Not just as this, direct physical thing that happens to you, but as something, well, way more complex. Maybe something that can even be shared or influenced by things we don't even consciously notice around us.
Right.
So today, we're going to unpack this. We'll explore these really surprising and maybe crucial connections between sound, our stress responses, the whole complicated world of inflammation, and, well, how we actually experience pain.
And we'll be looking at some pretty cutting-edge research.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll try to bridge that science to some very real, very human stories, from the sounds inside a hospital ward to just the everyday noise of living in a city.
It's about understanding how what we hear, our acoustic surroundings, can really impact our physical well-being in ways we're maybe only just starting to figure out.
It really feels like peeling back a layer on something we thought we understood.
It is. And it's truly remarkable how this all kicked off with some research that honestly challenged some pretty basic assumptions about pain. A team over at the Tokyo University of Science, led by Assistant Professor Satoka Kasai, they did a series of experiments that really laid the groundwork for this whole idea of audible pain.
Okay, so what was it they found that was so revolutionary? Because, yeah, when I first heard about it, I immediately thought, hang on, what does that actually mean for people?
Exactly. We tend to think of pain pretty simply, right? Like you stub your toe, it hurts. Tissue damage equals pain.
Right, cause and effect.
But pain is just so much more complicated than that. It's sensory, yes, but it's also deeply emotional. And we've known for a while that psychological stress, feeling anxious or overwhelmed, can seriously ramp up how much pain we feel.
Sure, that makes sense.
But Kasai's team looked beyond just individual stress. They looked at something called the bystander effect in mice.
The bystander effect?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how does that work in mice?
Well, imagine this. You have healthy mice, and they're housed near other mice who are experiencing inflammatory pain. What they observed is that the healthy mice started showing heightened pain sensitivity themselves.
Without being injured.
Without being injured.
Yeah.
It's a condition called hyperalgesia. And for a long time, nobody really knew how this social transmission of pain was happening. It wasn't like they were catching something, They were just nearby.
So if they weren't getting hurt, how was the pain, spreading? Was it seeing the other mice in pain or smelling something? What was the mechanism?
That was the big question.
Yeah.
And this is where their study got really clever. See, rodents, like mice, they make these really high-pitched squeaks when they're in pain or stressed out.
Okay.
But a lot of these aren't just squeaks we could hear. They're ultrasonic vocalizations, UVS. And the really crucial thing here, they're completely inaudible to us. Humans literally cannot hear these sounds.
Whoa, okay. So a mouse hears it, but we wouldn't even know it's happening. That's a huge difference.
Massive. So the researchers designed this really elegant experiment. They recorded the stress calls from mice in pain, and then they carefully isolated only the ultrasonic part of the sound.
Got it. Just the high-frequency stuff.
Yes, the high-frequency stuff. Then they took these pure ultrasonic stress recordings and played them back to healthy, naive mice. And these mice were put in a soundproof box. Critically, there were no other cues. They couldn't see the other mice, couldn't smell them, couldn't touch them, nothing.
Just the sound. Wow, that's incredibly controlled to really isolate that one variable. So what happened to the mice hearing these ultrasonic squeaks?
The effect was, well, pretty immediate and really telling. They measured the mice's sensitivity using something called von Frey filaments. These are basically tiny calibrated fibers.
Okay.
You gently touch them to the mouse's paw, and you see how much force it takes for the mouse to pull its paw away. It's a standard way to measure pain threshold.
Right.
And what they found was that the mice who only heard the ultrasonic stress sounds showed a significant drop in their paw withdrawal threshold.
Meaning they pulled their paw away much sooner, with less force.
Exactly. It indicated hyperalgesia, that heightened sensitivity to pain we talked about, even though, and this is the key part, they hadn't suffered any injury themselves. It was triggered solely by hearing the sound of another mouse's distress.
Okay, hold on. So it's not just that they were, like, feeling anxious or jumpy because of the sound. Their actual physical threshold for feeling pain changed. That feels like a massive leap from just empathy or stress.
It's a huge leap. It's a physiological change. And they didn't stop just observing the behavior. They wanted to know why, what was happening biologically.
Like molecular stuff.
Exactly. So they did what's called a microarray analysis. It's a technique that lets you look at the activity of thousands of genes all at once at a tissue sample, in this case, brain tissue.
Oh.
And they discovered that exposing mice just to the sound stress caused 444 genes become more active, upregulated, and 231 genes become less active, downregulated, compared to control mice who didn't hear the sounds.
That's a lot of genes changing activity just because of a sound. Were there any specific ones that stood out?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
They saw a significant upregulation of genes with some pretty technical names like prostaglandin, endoperoxidase, synthase 2, and CXC motif chemokine ligand 1.
Okay, and what do those complicated names actually tell us? What functions are they related to?
Good question. When they dug into what these genes actually do, what pathways they're involved in, the picture became pretty clear. These genes are closely tied to inflammatory responses.
Inflammation, like swelling and redness, but in the brain.
Sort of. Specifically, responses often triggered by things like bacterial components and also pathways involving something called tumor necrosis factor, or TNF, which is a major player in inflammation.
Wow.
So this strongly suggested that these inflammatory pathways weren't just, happening alongside the pain sensitivity. They seemed to be playing a direct role in causing the sound-induced hyperalgesia. The sound was literally kicking off inflammation in their brains.
So the sound itself acts like a trigger for brain inflammation, which then makes the mice physically more sensitive to pain, even without an injury. That's almost like a silent injury happening just from hearing something.
That's a really good way to put it, a silent injury. And they added more evidence to nail this down. They treated some of the sound-exposed mice with anti-inflammatory drugs, basically, pain relievers.
Like ibuprofen for mice.
Kind of, yeah. And guess what? These drugs significantly suppress the pain responses caused by the sound.
Okay, that's pretty direct evidence linking the inflammation to the pain response.
Very direct. And there was more. If mice already had some kind of inflammatory pain, hearing these distress sounds actually made their existing pain last longer. It exacerbated it.
Oh, wow. So it poured fuel on the fire.
Exactly.
Wow.
But conversely, giving anti-inflammatory drugs lessened the pain that was made worse by the sound. So all these different angles kept pointing back to the same thing. A direct causal link between this specific sound stress, brain inflammation, and heightened pain.
It's like the sound wasn't just a background noise. It was an active ingredient making things worse or even starting the problem.
Precisely. So the really big takeaway from this study, the groundbreaking part, is that it showed really for the first time that this social transfer of pain can happen just through sound. No sight, no smell, just sound waves. And this really forces us to reconsider the impact of our environment, right? Even factors we might not consciously notice, like sounds outside our hearing range, can have a profound effect on pain, especially chronic pain. Yeah. Our surroundings aren't passive. They're actively shaping our biology.
That mouse research is just, it really opens your eyes, or ears, I guess. It suggests this whole level of how our bodies respond to sound that we've maybe completely underestimated.
Right.
And okay, yeah, we're not mice, obviously. But the basic principles here, how sound, stress, and inflammation are tangled together, that could give us huge insights into our own environments, especially places that are meant to be healing, like hospitals. Which naturally brings us to our first story. It feels like such a human reflection of what they saw in the lab. I came across some fascinating research about how the mere sound of distress can physically cause inflammation and pain in others, at least in animal studies. It made me think about our own environments. We're not mice, of course, but the idea that our surroundings could be silently amplifying our pain is a powerful one. It got me looking for stories that might echo this science. I saw a story on a patient advocacy forum shared by the daughter of a woman named Evelyn. Evelyn, 72, was recovering from a standard knee replacement in a large city hospital. She was tough, a woman who rarely complained, but her recovery was stalling. Her pain was persistent, far beyond what the doctors anticipated, and she couldn't get any deep restorative sleep. Her daughter described the soundscape of the ward: the constant high-pitched beeping of fobby pumps, the low hum of monitors, the squeak of cartwheels, the urgent muffled conversations at the nurse's station, and most hauntingly, the soft groans from other patients in nearby rooms. Evelyn was surrounded by a symphony of stress. I tried to imagine her lying there, her body trying to heal, while her brain was being flooded with these ambient sounds of anxiety and malfunction. It wasn't until her daughter brought in a pair of high-quality, noise-canceling headphones playing gentle rain sounds that things changed. The first night she used them, Evelyn slept for 6 straight hours. Within 2 days, her requests for pain medication dropped by half. Her physical therapist noted she was less tense, more able to participate. It's just one story, but it feels like a human reflection of that lab research. It suggests that a hospital, a place of healing, can inadvertently create an environment of auditory stress that fosters the very inflammation it's trying to cure. Her healing wasn't just about medicine, it was about silencing the sounds of suffering.
Evelyn's story is just incredibly compelling, isn't it? Because it paints such a clear, real-world picture of the very principles we just discussed from the mouse study.
It really does.
It highlights exactly how that constant ambient sound in a hospital might be directly making pain worse and slowing down recovery for patients. You can almost draw a straight line from the rodent studies to her experience.
Yeah, that phrase her daughter used, a symphony of stress. It's striking. We usually just think of those hospital sounds, the beeps, the hums, those muffled cries, as, annoying distractions.
Yeah.
But you're suggesting they might be doing something much deeper, much more harmful than just bothering her.
That's exactly it. What Evelyn was likely experiencing wasn't just psychological distress, although I'm sure that was part of it.
Yeah.
Based on the neurobiology we're starting to understand, those sounds, the beeps indicating malfunction, the groans indicating suffering, could very well have been kicking off a physiological response,
Yeah.
a neuroinflammatory reaction in her brain, really similar to what we saw in the mice.
So it's not just empathy making her feel worse about her own pain.
It might be more direct. It's the possibility that her body was interpreting these specific sounds as ongoing danger signals, triggering that inflammatory cascade we talked about, which then physically worsened her condition. Her body was essentially hearing pain and the stress signals and responding with more inflammation and sensitivity.
And the results, when they change the soundscape, that's the powerful part. Getting better sleep, needing less pain medication, just by putting on noise-canceling headphones, playing rain sounds. That feels like more than just placebo, right? If it's changing actual pain outcomes.
Absolutely. It strongly underscores this potential, which is often just completely overlooked, for managing the sound environment to have a really significant impact on pain management and how well patients recover in hospitals.
It really makes you think about this sort of unseen burden in healthcare.
It does. Hospitals are obviously designed for healing, but Evelyn's story reinforces this idea that they might, completely unintentionally, be contributing to inflammation and making pain stick around longer just because of their sound environment.
It really shifts the focus, doesn't it? From just treating symptoms with drugs to thinking about the whole environment and how it affects a patient's biology and their ability to heal.
It's a much more holistic view.
Okay, so to really get why Evelyn or those mice respond this way, we need to dive deeper, right, into the really intricate biology happening inside us.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into this fascinating, really complex landscape of neurobiology to truly understand how chronic stress, including the kind caused by sound, leads to inflammation and hits our pain levels and even our mental health.
Right, let's sort of lay the groundwork here. We know that being under chronic stress, long-term stress, is a major risk factor for inflammation in the nervous system, what we call neuroinflammation, and also for conditions like depression.
Okay.
In fact, a pretty significant chunk of patients with major depressive disorder, maybe up to nearly 30%, show clear signs of this neuroinflammation in those cases. They often tend to be more severe, more chronic, and harder to treat.
Wow, so the inflammation is linked to worse outcomes?
It seems that way. And while the research is still working out the exact cause and effect in every single case, the underlying mechanisms are becoming much clearer. We're also seeing what are called transdiagnostic effects,
Meaning?
meaning there might be shared root causes, shared risk factors that contribute to both psychological issues like depression and physical problems like metabolic disorders. It's all interconnected.
So stress isn't just making us feel bad, it's literally changing our biology deep down. Where does that whole chain reaction start? What's the first domino?
A really key player is the system called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. Think of it as your body's main control center for stress response.
Okay, the command center.
Yeah. Normally, when you face a stressor, the HPA axis jumps into action. It releases cortisol, the famous stress hormone. And part of cortisol's job, interestingly, is usually to decrease inflammation, to calm things back down.
So it's supposed to regulate itself, put the fire out after the emergency. But under chronic stress, it breaks.
That's exactly what happens. Under constant, persistent stress, the HPA axis gets overworked. It just keeps pumping out cortisol.
Yeah.
And over time, your body can actually become less sensitive to cortisol's calming signals. It's called glucocorticoid receptor resistance.
Like the cells just stop listening.
Pretty much. Your immune cells, instead of getting the message to calm down, do the opposite. They start releasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, those signals that shout, turn up the inflammation. We can even measure this HPA axis hyperactivity in people with severe depression. And this understanding is already leading to new ideas for treatment, trying to find ways to sort of reset that faulty stress response system.
Okay, so the stress response itself, when it goes haywire, becomes a source of inflammation. What else is going on inside the body signaling trouble?
Well, another crucial part involves something called damage-associated molecular patterns, DAMPs, and pattern recognition receptors, or PRRs.
Okay, DAMPs and PRRs. Break that down for us.
Think of DAMPs as your body's internal alarm bells or danger signals. These are molecules that cells release when they're stressed, damaged, or dying abnormally. Things like HMGB1 or certain heat shock proteins.
So a stressed cell sends out an SOS.
Exactly. And these SOS signals, the DAMPs, then bind to the PRs. The PRs are like tiny antennas on the surface of your immune cells, your macrophages, dendritic cells, and importantly, microglial cells, which are the main immune cells in your brain.
Got it. Alarm bells ring and the immune system's antennas pick it up.
Precisely. And when those PRs get activated, it triggers your innate immune response, the body's first line of defense. This activation is absolutely central to keeping inflammation going, both throughout the body and crucially within the brain.
And is there a link here back to the sound stress?
There is. One really important PRR, especially relevant here, is toll-like receptor 4, or TLR4. It's found on these immune cells. When TLR4 gets activated, it kicks off a chain reaction that pumps out a whole bunch of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And here's the direct link back to the mice. Research shows that repeated acoustic stress, just general noise exposure, can actually activate this specific TLR4 pathway and increase those inflammatory signals right in the prefrontal cortex of the brain.
Wow. So there's a specific molecular pathway linking noise directly to brain inflammation that feels huge.
It is a huge connection. It shows how something environmental like sound can flip a switch at the molecular level inside the brain.
Okay, so these alarms are ringing, TLR4 is activated, inflammation is building. What happens next? Where do these signals go?
All these different players feed into this larger communication network run by cytokines. Think of cytokines as the immune system's text messages. They're small signaling molecules that tell other parts of the immune system whether to ramp up inflammation or tamp it down.
Like attack or stand down messages.
Exactly. And in conditions like depression, especially when it's linked with chronic physical illnesses, you often see this clear imbalance. Too many attack messages, pro-inflammatory cytokines like IL-1, IL-6, TNFR, and not enough stand-down messages, the anti-inflammatory ones like IL-10. This imbalance itself seems to be a distinct pathway contributing to depression.
So it's not just general inflammation, it's a specific kind of miscommunication in the immune system.
Yes. Take TNF-FA, tumor necrosis factor alpha. It's a really potent pro-inflammatory cytokine. It's vital for firing up your immune defenses, but too much of it can cause problems. It can even trigger cell death and cause cells to release more of those DAMPs, those alarm bells.
Creating a vicious cycle.
Exactly. It feeds back on itself, perpetuating the inflammation. It's a self-sustaining loop that can be really hard to break.
Okay, this sounds like a really difficult cycle once it gets going. And how does all this inflammation happening in the body actually get into the brain? Isn't the brain supposed to be protected?
It is. That's where the blood-brain barrier, the BBB, comes in. Think of it like a very selective bouncer at the door of a club, or maybe a superfine filter protecting your brain.
Right, keeping the riffraff out.
Exactly. Normally, it's very tightly sealed. It stops harmful substances, including most of these inflammatory molecules circulating in your body, from getting into the delicate brain tissue. But under chronic stress and persistent inflammation, that barrier can get damaged.
It becomes leaky.
That's the word, leaky. Chronic stress and inflammation can actually mess with the tight junctions, the literal seals between the cells that form this barrier in the brain's tiny blood vessels. Pro-inflammatory cytokines themselves, along with other factors, can essentially degrade the BBB, making it more permeable.
So the bouncer gets overwhelmed and things start slipping through.
Precisely. This allows immune cells and inflammatory molecules from the body to migrate into the brain, which then adds fuel to the fire, perpetuating neuroinflammation right within the central nervous system. Studies have even shown reductions in key tight junction proteins in certain brain areas linked to depression-like behaviors when inflammatory signals get through.
Okay, so the body's inflammation can directly invade the brain when that protective barrier is weakened. What happens inside the brain once these inflammatory signals and cells get past the bouncer?
Well, once they infiltrate the brain, they trigger a response from the brain's own immune system called gliosis. This basically means the brain's support cells, the glial cells, you've got astrocytes, microglia, oligodendrocytes, they start to multiply and get bigger. Think of it as the brain's internal immune system going on high alert. And this gliosis is strongly linked with higher levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines and damaging molecules in key brain regions involved in mood, pain, and cognition.
And you mentioned microglia earlier, the brain's immune cells. They have a kind of double-edged sword role, right? They can help or harm.
It's exactly right. Microglia are fascinating. They can shift into different states or phenotypes. In one state, the M1 phenotype, they become neurotoxic. They release more pro-inflammatory cytokines and also excessive glutamate, which can overexcite and damage neurons.
The bad guys in this situation.
Pretty much. In their other state, M2, they're neuroprotective, helping with cleanup and repair the good guys. But during chronic inflammation, the balance often tips towards that harmful M1 state. We can even see this using PD scans, which show increased markers of M1 microglial activation in the brains of people with depression. Interestingly, some research suggests certain antibiotics like minocycline might help depression, partly by inhibiting these harmful microglia and reducing inflammation.
So even the brain's own defense system can turn against it if the inflammatory environment persists. Wow. What about the direct chemical stress on the brain cells themselves?
This brings us neatly to oxidative and nitrosative stress. Think of it as a kind of chemical imbalance within your cells, like having too many corrosive free radicals and not enough protective antioxidants to neutralize them.
Like cellular rust.
That's a great analogy. Cellular rust, the brain uses a ton of oxygen, making it especially vulnerable to this oxidative stress. When those immune cells, like macrophages and microglia, get activated, they churn out these reactive oxygen species, or ROS, the free radicals, which can damage everything. Cell membranes, proteins, even DNA. This overwhelms the body's natural antioxidant defenses. In depression, we often see signs of this lower levels of antioxidants like vitamin E or zinc and higher levels of the byproducts of this oxidative damage. It's another vicious cycle. Inflammation drives oxidative stress, and oxidative stress can fuel more inflammation.
And you mentioned nitrosative stress too. Is that related?
Yes, it's closely related. Nitrosative stress comes from having too much nitric oxide, or NO. Now, NO does important things in the body, but in excess, it can react with other molecules to form peroxynitrite, which is a really potent oxidant. It damages cells, messes with their energy production, and contributes to that cytokine-induced depression we keep talking about. Too much NO can also overstimulate certain brain receptors, leading to what's called excitotoxicity, essentially, overworking brain cells to death. But again, understanding this opens doors for therapies, maybe using agents that can soak up or reduce excess NO.
Okay, it really feels like a cascade, a domino effect. Stress triggers inflammation, inflammation damages the brain's barrier, activates brain immune cells, causes oxidative stress. How does all this ultimately affect how our brain actually communicates? The neurotransmitters.
That's the crucial endpoint, really. It leads to neurotransmitter dysregulation and neurotoxicity. Those pro-inflammatory cytokines and inflammatory messengers can directly mess with the supply of critical neurotransmitters, the chemicals brain cells use to talk to each other, like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine.
How do they do that?
They can do it in a few ways. They can increase the activity of reuptake pumps, which are like little vacuum cleaners that suck neurotransmitters back up before they've had a chance to deliver their message. They can deplete the essential building blocks or cofactors needed to make these neurotransmitters in the first place.
Yeah.
And they can activate an enzyme called IDO, which diverts tryptophan, the raw ingredient for serotonin, down a different metabolic pathway.
So inflammation is literally hijacking the brain's communication system and stealing the ingredients for, like, our feel-good chemicals.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And one particularly nasty byproduct of that diverted tryptophan pathway is something called quinolinic acid, or QUIN.
Okay.
Activated microglia, especially when fired up by inflammation, can really ramp up QIN production. And high levels of QIN are bad news. They overstimulate crucial receptors in the brain, particularly NMDA receptors, leading to that glutamatergic excitotoxicity we mentioned, overexciting neurons, potentially damaging them.
And that connects to depression symptoms.
Yes. High QIN levels are found in depressed patients and have been linked to more severe symptoms, even suicidal thinking. It disrupts the function of brain circuits, essential for regulating emotions and processing rewards, leading to things like fatigue, lack of motivation, that feeling of anhedonia or inability to feel pleasure.
So earlier you mentioned noisier circuits. Is this essentially what causes that, this imbalance?
That's exactly right. This whole neuroinflammatory process often leads to synaptic loss, basically, connections between brain cells breaking down and problems with functional connectivity. You see fewer connections, especially in key areas like the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. At the same time, you often get decreased inhibitory neurotransmission, less GABA activity, for instance, so the brain's brakes aren't working as well.
So less braking, more acceleration, leading to chaos.
Leads to imbalance. You shift the delicate excitatory-inhibitory balance towards too much excitation, too much glutamate activity. Imagine that finely tuned orchestra again. The quiet instruments get too quiet, the loud ones get way too loud. It results in these noisier circuits. Yeah. Information processing becomes less efficient, different brain regions can't communicate effectively, and that manifests as the symptoms we see in depression, difficulty regulating emotions, problems with focus, lack of motivation. Understanding this EI imbalance is now a huge focus for developing new treatments, aiming to restore that balance, to retune the orchestra.
Wow. That was an incredibly detailed journey deep into our biology. But the core message seems to be these tiny molecules, these intricate pathways, they are constantly reacting to our world, even to the sounds we hear. And that reaction can directly fuel inflammation, pain, and mood problems.
That's the essence of it.
Okay, so let's pull back from the microscope view now. Let's pivot from the intricate neurobiology inside one person to the bigger picture, the public health side of things. Chronic noise, environmental stress. Let's move beyond the hospital walls to everyday life. Which brings us to another story, one that really highlights the silent burden of noise in our modern world. Then I heard a story about a young man named Marco, a freelance programmer living in a small apartment in the heart of Rome. For years, he'd been battling chronic migraines and a persistent dull ache in his shoulders and neck that doctors simply labeled stress-related. He worked from home, and his window overlooked a busy piazza. His daily soundtrack was a chaotic mix of tour bus engines, the constant wail of ambulance sirens weaving through traffic, the roar of scooters, and the indistinct clamor of thousands of people. He told a friend he'd learned to tune it out, that it was just background noise. But his body was still listening. His migraines would flare up on days with unusually heavy traffic or when construction started nearby. He lived in a state of constant, low-grade alertness, his nervous system simmering. Trying to work, he'd find himself irritable and tense for no apparent reason. I imagine him sitting there, bathed in this invisible acoustic smog. He is a perfect example of the public health question this research raises. We regulate the quality of our air and water, but what about the quality of our soundscapes? Marco's chronic pain wasn't just in his head, it was in his environment. His story makes me wonder how many people in our loud, bustling cities are suffering from a neuroinflammatory response triggered not by an injury or a disease, but by the relentless noise of the world they inhabit.
Marco's situation is, well, it's a really powerful and, frankly, probably very common example of how this chronic urban noise pollution isn't just irritating. It can become a really deep, insidious threat to health.
Yeah, insidious feels like the right word.
Because even if, like Marco, you think you've consciously tuned it out, you think it's just background noise, your body is still processing it subconsciously. It's perceiving that constant noise as a low-grade danger signal.
Always on alert.
Always on alert. It keeps triggering that fight or flight response in your sympathetic nervous system, just simmering away. And that leads to this whole cascade of subtle, sneaky, physiological changes happening below the level of your awareness. Your body doesn't just ignore the noise because your conscious mind tries to.
So it's not just about how loud a sound is, but how constant it is. A sudden loud noise is startling, but maybe this persistent drone is doing something different, but just as bad.
Exactly. That persistence creates this chronic low-level stress state. And the health effects of this chronic noise exposure, they're pretty significant, and we're getting more and more data on them. We're talking measurable increases in blood pressure, higher heart rate,
Physical effects.
real physical effects, hormonal changes that aren't good for you long term. Plus, heightened anxiety, stress, nervousness. People report things like nausea, those persistent headaches, just like Marco's migraines, mood swings, feeling generally neurotic. It's also strongly linked to tinnitus, that awful chronic ringing in the ears, which then messes up sleep and makes people irritable. And there's even a statistical link, a small but significant one, to increased risk of cardiovascular disease.
Wow. When you list it like that, it's clear it's not just about being annoyed by a noisy neighbor. It's a genuine health burden. What are some of the worst culprits in our cities that create this acoustic smog you mentioned?
Oh, there are plenty. Think about a typical big city. Subway systems, for example. The New York City subway has been measured with levels regularly way above what the WHO or EPA considers safe. We're talking maybe 94 decibels on the platform, spiking up to 106 inside the train cars.
And sustained exposure to that is bad.
Very bad. Even 30 seconds at those levels isn't considered safe. Then you've got the constant blare of car horns, just the general roar of traffic, the nonstop banging and grinding from building construction.
Don't forget the leaf blowers.
The leaf blowers, exactly. Power tools running for hours. And in some places, even things like the constant drone of helicopters overhead add to this daily acoustic assault.
Okay, so this hidden physical toll, the chronic pain Marco felt, how does that specifically tie back to the animal studies? You mentioned something about persistence.
Yeah, this connects directly back to that really compelling research on rats. Remember, those studies showed that sound stress alone could cause that heightened pain sensitivity, hyperalgesia. And crucially, that sensitivity could stick around for a remarkably long time, up to 28 days after the stress stopped, even with no physical injury.
28 days. That's amazing. What keeps it going for so long?
The researchers found that this long-lasting pain sensitivity was maintained by what are called sympathoadrenal catecholamines, basically hormones from the sympathetic nervous system and adrenal glands, particularly epinephrine.
Epinephrine, like adrenaline.
Exactly, like adrenaline.
Yeah.
Imagine your body being constantly stuck in that low-level fight-or-flight mode, and that state itself makes you more sensitive to pain signals. The epinephrine levels stay elevated, keeping that hyper-alert, hypersensitive state going.
Wow. Did they test that directly?
They did. In those same rat studies, when they surgically removed the part of the adrenal gland that makes epinephrine, it actually reversed the hyperalgesia. And when they then gave the rats continuous epinephrine implants, the pain sensitivity came right back.
Okay, so that really nails down epinephrine's role in keeping that stress-induced pain going.
It does. And this has potentially huge relevance for human chronic pain conditions, especially things like fibromyalgia, where you see widespread pain. While the HPA axis, that main stress system, might be involved, there's growing evidence that overactivity in the sympathetic nervous system, that constant fight-or-flight readiness fueled by things like epinephrine, is a major factor driving the persistent pain.
It's just astonishing hearing all this, that noise pollution isn't treated more seriously as a public health issue. We regulate air quality, water quality. Noise often feels like it just gets ignored.
It's true, and it's a real problem. What's concerning is that, historically, noise pollution just hasn't had the same kind of comprehensive policy or laws focused on it compared to air or water. Despite the fact that it's pervasive, it clearly has detrimental effects on our well-being and long-term health. It's often just dismissed as an unavoidable annoyance, rather than being treated like the significant environmental pollutant it actually is.
Yeah. It's clear noise isn't just annoying. It's a physical threat, potentially driving inflammation and pain silently. But, okay, understanding the problem is one thing. The crucial part, maybe the more hopeful part, is figuring out solutions. How can we actually design our spaces, our environments, to reduce this sound stress and maybe even promote healing? Which leads us perfectly into our final story, focusing on interventions and ways forward. Finally, I want you to try to imagine a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne. She's not a medical doctor, but an acoustical engineer in Manchester. I see her as someone who was deeply affected by this kind of research. Perhaps she saw a loved one suffer in a noisy care facility. Instead of seeing the problem as unsolvable, she saw it as an engineering challenge. She began consulting for a firm that designs restorative environments. Her first project was a new pediatric ward. She used materials that absorb rather than reflect sharp sounds. She designed a smart system that detected jarring noises, like a dropped metal tray or an alarm, and instantly masked them with a targeted, low-frequency sound that is barely perceptible but neurologically calming. The hallways were designed not as echo chambers, but with curves and sound-dampening textures. Even the ventilation system was engineered to produce a soft pink noise, similar to the sound of steady rain, which is known to improve sleep quality. The results were more than just aesthetic. After 6 months, the hospital reported that the children on this ward required, on average, 15% less pain medication and had shorter recovery times compared to the old ward. This story, even if it's just a projection of what's possible, shows us the way forward. It's about a paradigm shift. Instead of just reacting to pain with pharmacology, we can proactively design our world to prevent the stress-induced inflammation that fuels it. It's about building healing into the very walls and air around us.
Dr. Thorne's vision, even as a projection, it really captures this paradigm shift, doesn't it? Moving towards proactively designing for healing by tackling environmental sound right at the source.
Yeah, it feels proactive instead of just reactive.
Exactly. And her approach, these environmental design interventions, it's multi-layered. It starts with really conscious choices about the physical materials used in a space, instead of hard surfaces that make every little sound echo and bounce around.
Like in so many hospitals?
Exactly. Imagine using materials that actually absorb sharp sounds. Thinking about designing hallways not as long, straight echo chambers, but maybe with gentle curves, using sound-dampening textures on the walls.
So fundamentally changing the physical space to shape the sound. But what about those noises you just can't avoid in a busy place like a hospital? The alarms, the dropped metal tray she mentioned.
That's where the smart systems idea comes in. She imagines technology that can actually detect those sudden jarring noises in real time, that horrible clatter of a dropped tray or a piercing alarm. And the system would instantly respond by emitting a targeted, low-frequency sound, something you might barely even notice consciously, but that's specifically designed to be neurologically calming, to kind of counteract or mask the stressful sound.
That's incredible. It's like having a built-in acoustic buffer, managing noise intelligently instead of just trying to eliminate it all. And you mentioned pink noise in her story. What is that exactly, and how does it help?
Pink noise is a specific type of sound. It's often compared to the sound of steady rain or maybe a gentle waterfall. Unlike white noise, which has equal energy across all frequencies and can sometimes sound a bit harsh.
Yeah, like static.
Right. Pink noise has more energy in the lower frequencies, which makes it sound softer, more balanced, and generally more soothing to our ears. So Dr. Thorne's approach includes engineering things like the ventilation system to produce this gentle background pink noise, because it's specifically known to help improve sleep quality.
And the results in her story, 15% less pain medication, faster recovery times for the kids, that's not just about making the place feel nicer. That's a real, measurable therapeutic effect.
Absolutely. It elevates sound design from just being about comfort or aesthetics to being a genuine therapeutic intervention.
Yeah.
It's using sound to actively support the healing process.
That is truly remarkable. Can we take this philosophy, this idea of sonic strategies beyond hospitals, into our cities, our homes?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
You can absolutely broaden this concept to urban planning, even to how we design our homes. It involves thinking about sound strategically, sometimes subtracting unwanted noise, sometimes maybe thoughtfully adding pleasant sounds. Well, imagine city planners deliberately planting dense rows of trees, known for their sound-absorbing qualities along busy roads. Or designing public squares and courtyards not just for looks, but with specific acoustic properties to create little oases of quiet. It also means pushing for things like quieter buses and trains, having stricter regulations for construction equipment noise, maybe even encouraging quieter alternatives for things like yard work using a rake instead of a leaf blower.
Ah, the eternal battle against the leaf blower.
Right. But the core idea is a cultural shift.
Okay.
Starting to treat noise seriously as a pollutant, just like we manage air and water quality, and actively designing our shared spaces for better acoustic health.
Okay, so environmental design is one big avenue. What about other non-drug approaches? I have to imagine music comes into play here somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. Music-based interventions are another incredibly promising and thankfully non-pharmacological way to help manage pain and improve overall well-being.
And it's not a new idea, right?
Not at all. Music as therapy is wonderfully inexpensive. It's safe, it's non-invasive, and it has this incredibly long history, going way back to the ancient Greeks. Plus, many indigenous cultures have long recognized and utilized music's power to reduce pain and distress.
So how does music actually work biologically to help with pain? Is it just distracting us, making us feel good?
It's far more than just distraction, though that can be part of it. Music's real power seems to lie in its ability to directly modulate our neurochemistry, the chemical messengers in our brain, which in turn influences how we perceive pain.
Okay, how so?
Well, take serotonin, for example. Music has really complex effects on serotonin, which we know is involved in pain, anxiety, depression. Descending serotonin pathways from the brainstem are part of our body's own built-in pain control system, the diffuse noxious inhibitory control, or DNIC system. It helps turn down the volume on pain signals coming up from the spinal cord.
So music helps activate our body's natural pain relief system via serotonin. What about other brain chemicals?
Noradrenaline, or norepinephrine, is another key player. Similar to serotonin, descending noradrenergic pathways are also part of that DNIC system, providing pain-relieving effects. Plus, circulating noradrenaline and adrenaline involved in the stress response affect things like heart rate and blood pressure. And music has consistently been shown to help lower those stress markers.
And what about our body's own natural painkillers, the opioids?
Yes, the endogenous opioids.
Sure.
Our body makes its own opioid peptides, like beta-endorphin and enkephalin's dynorphin. They bind to our opioid receptors. And fascinatingly, research shows that using music interventions can actually lead to people needing less opioid medication for pain.
Wow.
And beyond just pain relief, these natural opioids also have anti-inflammatory effects and reduce the body's physiological stress response. So you get this kind of double benefit from music potentially boosting them.
Okay, and you also mentioned oxytocin earlier in a different context, the love hormone.
Yeah.
Does that play a role with music and pain too?
It seems to. Oxytocin has known analgesic effects, pain-relieving effects across different types of pain. And studies have shown that listening to or engaging with music can actually increase oxytocin levels. So it's not just that music is pleasant. It seems to be biochemically promoting the release of our own internal pharmacy of pain-relieving and stress-reducing compounds.
That is just incredible. It's like music is conducting this internal orchestra of healing chemicals. How does this connect back specifically to the inflammation we've been talking so much about?
Well, these analgesic effects, the pain relief, and what we call the immunohomeostatic effects of music, its ability to help balance the immune system, are deeply tied into these neuromodulatory systems. For instance, studies have shown that just listening to music or even singing in a choir can significantly boost levels of an important antibody called immunoglobulin A, IgA, in saliva.
Boosting the immune system directly.
It seems like it. Music interventions also consistently show reductions in cortisol, that main stress hormone, and importantly, they've been shown to reduce plasma levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines like IL-6.
So music isn't just making us feel less stressed, it's actively dampening that inflammatory response at a molecular level and maybe even strengthening our immune defenses.
That's what the evidence suggests. The mechanisms are complex and probably involve multiple pathways. Our pain receptors themselves, the nociceptors, actually have receptors for these neuromodulators like beta-endorphin, oxytocin, noradrenaline. So music might be directly influencing how these pain nerves respond, partly by tweaking that immunoinflammatory environment around them. Plus, think about how music affects us physically. It regulates breathing, promotes relaxation, calms the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah, you naturally relax when you listen to calming music.
Exactly. And those effects show real parallels with practices like mindfulness and meditation, which we know alter activity in key brain areas involved in processing pain and emotion areas, like the anterior cingulate cortex, the prefrontal cortex, the insula, the striatum, the amygdala. Music seems to tap into these same regulatory networks.
So understanding all this, how sound, stress, inflammation, neurochemistry all interact, it really points towards exciting future directions, doesn't it? Especially for developing new ways to help people.
Absolutely. This deep understanding of how our environment, especially sound, affects our biology really opens up a huge and exciting landscape for future directions, particularly in developing new therapies.
Okay, so we've talked about environmental design, music therapy. Shifting back towards pharmacology for a moment, what are the next frontiers based on this understanding of stress-induced neuroinflammation?
Well, one area gaining traction is using broader systemic anti-inflammatory agents. Things like NSAIDs, omega-3 fatty acids, even statins have shown some promise, maybe small to moderate effects, often when used alongside traditional antidepressants. But the research is getting much more refined.
How so?
For example, specific types of anti-inflammatories, like COX2 inhibitor celecoxib, is one have shown in animal studies they can actually reverse depressive behaviors caused by stress. And they might even boost the effectiveness of standard antidepressants like sertraline.
Interesting. What about omega-3s? Lots of people take fish oil. Does it really help at a therapeutic level for this?
It might, but the dose seems critical. Omega-3s, particularly EPA and DHA, definitely have anti-inflammatory roles. They can inhibit processes that drive inflammation. But research suggests that to get a really significant antidepressant effect, you might need quite high doses, maybe like 4 grams a day of EPA. It's likely more than typical supplement levels.
Okay, so dose matters. And statins, the cholesterol drugs, how do they fit in?
Statins are interesting because besides lowering cholesterol, they have broad anti-inflammatory effects. Simvastatin in particular seems promising. Animal studies show it can rescue depressive-like behaviors, help restore neurotransmitter balance, increase anti-inflammatory signals, and importantly, calm down that microglial activation in the brain we talked about.
Why simvastatin specifically?
It seems to be better at getting into the brain compared to some other statins because it's more fat-soluble lipophilic, so it might be particularly good at tackling neuroinflammation directly.
It's fascinating how these drugs developed, for one thing, turn out to affect these complex brain processes. Are there even more targeted approaches being developed aimed right at the inflammation?
Yes, absolutely. Beyond these broader anti-inflammatories, a major focus now is on highly targeted anti-cytokine therapies. These use something called monoclonal antibodies.
Okay.
These are essentially engineered proteins designed to find and neutralize very specific inflammatory cytokines, those attack messages.
Yeah.
And they've shown real statistically significant improvements in depressive symptoms, especially in people who already have chronic inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis.
So like smart bombs taking out specific inflammatory targets. Which ones are they targeting?
Exactly like smart bombs. There are antibodies targeting TNF-alpha drugs like adalimumab or infliximab. Others target IL-6 like tocilizumab, and even some targeting IL-17 like ixekizumab. The idea is to precisely block the specific inflammatory signals driving the problem without suppressing the entire immune system broadly.
That sounds incredibly precise. Are there other molecules they're looking at, maybe ones that are protective?
Yes, another exciting area involves a molecule called transforming growth factor beta, or TGF, particularly TGF-1. Unlike the ones we just mentioned, TGF-1 actually has neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory properties. It's involved in memory, synaptic plasticity. When a signaling pathway is messed up, you tend to see more microglial activation and inflammation.
So boosting TGF might be helpful.
Potentially. Some research suggests that certain rapid-acting antidepressants, like ketamine, might exert some of their effects partly through microglial TGF-1. And studies in animals have shown that giving TGF-1 directly, like through the nose, can promote the growth of new brain cells and reduce depressive behaviors.
Wow. What about helping the brain heal itself more generally, like promoting those growth factors you mentioned earlier?
Right, the neurotrophic factors. Yeah. Molecules like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, NGF, nerve growth factor. These are absolutely crucial for keeping neurons alive, helping them grow, and reducing neuroinflammation. They activate specific receptors on brain cells that trigger pathways leading to neuronal remodeling and the formation of new synapses, basically strengthening brain connections.
Can we just give people BDNF?
It's tricky. Directly administering these factors often doesn't work well because they don't easily get into the brain. So a lot of drug discovery work now is focused on finding ways to indirectly boost the brain's own production of these factors, maybe through drugs that affect certain receptors or by developing novel mimickers molecules that act like BDNF but are designed to cross the blood-brain barrier more effectively.
So whether it's designing quieter hospitals, using music, taking targeted anti-inflammatories, or boosting brain growth factors, the ultimate aim seems to be restoring balance in the brain, right? Quieting that internal noise.
Precisely. Ultimately, the goal of all these emerging therapies, whether they're environmental, behavioral like music, or pharmacological, is to restore that crucial excitatory to inhibitory balance, the EI balance that gets thrown off by neuroinflammation. It's about normalizing how the neural circuits function, quieting down those noisier circuits, and allowing the brain to get back to a state of healthy, efficient information processing and hopefully reduced pain and improved mood.
So we've really covered a lot of ground today. We journeyed from those tiny, inaudible squeaks of distressed mice sounds capable of sparking actual inflammation in healthy brains, all the way to the overwhelming noise of a busy city street and the, often unintentionally stressful soundscape of a hospital ward.
Yeah.
And what really comes through is this profound interconnectedness. Pain isn't just this straightforward, direct physical thing. It can be deeply influenced, even shaped by the sounds around us. And this happens through these incredibly complex biological pathways involving stress, inflammation, our immune system, and our brain chemistry.
It truly represents a significant paradigm shift, I think, in how we need to approach well-being. We have to move beyond thinking only about drugs or direct interventions for pain or mood. We need a much more holistic approach, one that seriously considers our environment, the sounds, the stressors, and leverages everything we have, from these new molecular targets to powerful non-drug approaches like sound design and music therapy.
Yeah.
This deeper understanding, it really opens up so many new possibilities for achieving a more complete, more integrated state of health and well-being for people.
It really does. It changes how you think about the spaces you inhabit and the sounds you hear every single day. And that's our deep dive for today.